Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to speak about the fallout of the peace proposal or ceasefire proposal, which was worked out in Jeddah between the American delegation and the men of President Zelensky, who wasn't there. Now, the most important thing to discuss is actually the Russian reactions to it. Everyone is expecting now what will be the official response of President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov to this proposed 30-day ceasefire. But what I would like to focus on is the reactions in the Russian media and in the Russian talk shows, where you have politicians and observers, members of the Duma, actually some Ukrainian emigres, and also some professors from Moscow University, from the Institute of Foreign of U.S. and Canada, and other prestigious institutions and academia. So the shows that I focus on particularly are the Solovyov show, which comes every night, and also the big game, or the grand play, or Большая игра in Russian, which is pretty much also every day, sort of sums up the political and military situation. And what's interesting is their reaction before everyone knows what President Putin would say to these proposals. So first, a couple of words about the proposals themselves. What's interesting, of course, and everyone noticed that, is that President Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire, which is, of course, a big breakthrough, because just a few days ago, his position was no negotiations with Putin. Putin couldn't be trusted. He will never accept any territorial losses, etc., etc. Now they are ready to accept a ceasefire. What's also interesting, and many observers have noticed that, is what's not in it, what's missing in, what's absent in this document on the U.S.-Ukrainian meeting in Jeddah, which is there's no talk at all about the security guarantees. There is no commitment to elections, nothing, not a word about NATO, not even a deal on metals, which was supposed to be signed, was signed. So very, very little actually has been agreed upon, except one, and that is the ceasefire for 30 days. Now, what's also extremely important is the provision that the intelligence sharing, as they call it, but to put it more bluntly, is the American satellite intelligence and targeting, is restored to the Ukrainian armed forces, and also the deliveries of weaponry. So this is the ceasefire proposal. Now, a few words about the interpretations of that. Why is this? Now, obviously, for any observers, any attentive observers, this position of President Trump is a step back. In other words, is despite all the scandal in Washington and the personal insults to Vice President Vance delivered by Zelensky, despite all this, the United States sort of caved in terms of restoring intelligence providing and the arms deliveries to Ukraine. Now, why is that? Now, my understanding is that Trump wants very much to avoid being called a Putin's puppet, or that he betrayed Ukraine, or that he lost Ukraine. So he wants to come across that he's tough on both Zelensky and Putin. And not only is he putting pressure on Zelensky, but at the same time, he, on the 12th, which is yesterday of March, said that Russia would suffer new sanctions and crippling to its finances and so on. In other words, this is obviously an attempt to come across as that Trump is tough, and not only forcing the hand of Ukraine to start peace negotiation, to start actually ceasefire, but at the same time at Putin. what does it mean? The most important thing that is obvious to the Russians is that the resumption of arms deliveries and of intelligence providing to the Ukrainian armed forces actually makes the United States a party to war. To put it in other words, without these intelligence data, and without the arms that the United States provides, Ukraine would not be able to conduct the war. Everybody knows this. The conclusion is, the logical conclusion is that the United States is waging a war on Russia with the hands of Ukrainians. In other words, the Ukrainians could not do anything without American help, which means Americans are a party of the war. And to expect that in these conditions the Russians would accept the 30-day ceasefire is highly unlikely. But so now I move to the discussions in the Russian media. The first argument that most observers point out is that if conditions are accepted of the ceasefire, that would mean that Ukrainians would rearm and regroup and would simply have a month to get new deliveries of American aid, American military supplies and targeting, and would resume their targeting and their drones attacks on Moscow and other cities, which is why it is unacceptable. The second reason when most observers point out that Russia should reject this outright is because just a few weeks ago, Foreign Minister Lavrov pointed out that Russia does not need a ceasefire. It needs a permanent, a stable peace. And only on such conditions they would stop military action. In other words, if they accept it now, it would mean that they would go back on their word, which is a promise not to stop military action until there is a until there is a peace treaty rather than a ceasefire. Now, so most of the kind of nationalist or patriotic or Solovyov show guests reject it outright. However, there are some that say, okay, maybe President Putin should actually accept it with conditions. And the conditions were listed as follows. Number one, that Ukraine should withdraw all troops and military personnel from Russian territories. And by Russian territories, they mean the 4 provinces that by Russian constitution have been already included into the Russian Federation. Now, of the 4 provinces, only one, Lugansk, is 98% cleared from the Ukrainian forces. Now, the other 3 obviously would be Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Donetsk. And Donetsk is the one where the fighting was going on since 2014, and that is the crucial one, and only 68% as of today have been taken over by the Russian forces. So the proposal, a counter proposal, these observers point out should be, when they withdraw from Russian territories, then we can discuss other things, such as post-war order in Ukraine and return of the prisoners of war and children and whatever else they want to discuss. But that is a condition a priori must be fulfilled. Other people, also observers, and these were Ukrainians who are living in Russia, who have been chased or who fled for their lives. These are people who are supported, who were of the Yanukovych presidency people, members of the Duma, and so on. So one of them said yesterday that one thing that the Ukrainians should do is on day one declare that the decree of Zelensky banning talking and negotiating with Putin is null and void. On day 2, they should announce general elections, and by the end of the month, it's quite possible to have elections, as they do it in Europe all the time. Not like in America, where they have a year to prepare elections. In Europe, they do it in a month or 2. So, and the third thing is that Ukraine declares that it is not going to be in NATO and remove that from this article from the Constitution. These are the conditions that should be met before any agreement on ceasefire is met. Now, other people also proposed these are the professors from Moscow School of Economics and from the Moscow Institute of Foreign Relations, is that not only should Ukraine withdraw from these territories, but also for the duration of the ceasefire, all military supplies to Ukraine should stop, both the American ones. And another proposal was not only from the America, but also from the European Union. And someone else added, no, that's not good enough either, from the 52 countries that were on the list of the Rammstein group of countries that provide military supplies to Ukraine. So for the duration of negotiations and or ceasefire, all military supplies should cease, stop. And of course, that also assumes the cessation of military intelligence to Ukraine so that American made weapons could target and shoot Russians in Russia. So, to now sum up who wants what at the current stage of political and diplomatic maneuvering, it seems to me that the Ukrainian side wants to convince Trump that Putin cannot be trusted and that he is not going to accept it. And this is why they made it explicitly so difficult for Putin to accept it by launching the biggest ever assault of drones on the Russian provinces, including Moscow. So they obviously, they don't want it, but Trump forced them, so they agreed, but they made it extremely difficult for Putin to accept it. So this is what they want. They want to convince Trump and go on fighting. Now, what Trump wants? We know now that long term, Trump does not want to continue the war. He does not want to waste the money. There is no plans to increase military supplies beyond what has already been ordered, been voted for in Congress by at the Biden administration time. However, he also does not want to be accused of the one who lost Ukraine or who betrayed Ukraine or that he is a Putin puppet or whatever. He wants to come across as a peacemaker, a broker who brokered the peace between the two. His problem is that it's not the Ukrainians who are providing the arms. It is American arms, and it is in his power to stop this. And this is exactly what the advice is of Colonel McGregor, who is an ardent supporter of President Trump, but at the same time, he voiced today the view that the United States should just walk away, stop all military supplies to Ukraine, stop all intelligence, and that would force, indeed, Ukraine and Zelensky to start negotiations and agree to Russian terms. Because if this is not done, in his view, Russian terms would get harder and would get much worse for Ukraine. Now, what does Putin want? I think that Putin wants very much some kind of a deal with Trump, but he has limitations too. Even Putin cannot stop the offensive in Kursk. This would be considered by the Russian public opinion as almost treason, because now that there is a successful operation and a breakthrough in Kursk, and the Russians are winning, and it's a matter of days for the Ukrainian forces to be completely chased out of Kursk, all of a sudden to order a halt now. My opinion is even Putin cannot do this. This is impossible. The momentum is there, and to stop an army of clearing the Ukrainians from Russian territory is impossible. However, I do think that what Putin really wants is a deal with Trump, and at the same time, it seems that both Trump and Putin would prefer Zelensky to go, and a more pliant or a more willing to concede territory and neutrality government to take shape. How that would be achieved is not known, but at least it seems to me this would be a point that perhaps in a more private setting, American and Russian delegations could discuss how to move forward so that the Russian conditions are met and the Americans don't come across as getting rid of Ukrainian national interest. So that's the square they have to find common ground on. And of course, we shall see what exactly Putin decides to do within these parameters. Thank you very much, and please subscribe, and don't forget to see my other playlists of war in Ukraine, Russia under Putin, Soviet history, and of course my big book from Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin. See the reference in description. Thank you. Bye-bye.